Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Today we're talking about the election as seen from the perspective of business and labor. First, we're joined by Kristen Smith, regional editor of the Center Square. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Kristen, you filed a story about an alternative for drivers who were unable to pay a fine to get their license back. Tell us about it.
This is targeted at low-income drivers who may be struggling to recover their privilege of driving after, traditional moving violations and things like that. This is not for people who have lost their licenses for much more serious offenses. And the idea here is that in lieu of paying fines that could be very cost prohibitive for people who are working lower wage jobs, they can perform community service so that they can get their license back and get their life back on track and not have to miss work or any of the other issues that may crop up and make the problem worse and worse and worse.
How expensive can these fines get anyway?
They can start from $50 and range to hundreds of dollars. It just depends on how delinquent you become. And again, the idea behind the legislation is not that, or is that people are delinquent not because they are trying to skirt the law, but because they are truly struggling with bills. We know in this economy that the cost of living has become untenable for many people. And so one ticket, could really set people back. And I know it is a couple of tickets before people get their license suspended, but in the effort of trying to help those people get back to where they need to be, this is something that is thought to help cover that cost. And on top of that, not every driver who is low income can do just community service in order to cover the fees that they would need to pay, but they can also get on a payment plan. So there is a process for qualifying for this, and the state is obviously in the very early stages. I believe Governor Josh Shapiro still has to sign it, although I could be wrong. He might have signed it already. It's a new week. However, this is something, it's brand new, but it's been in the works for many years. It's bipartisan, clearly, and lawmakers are really excited about getting it started.
Kristen, would making an offender do community service be at the discretion of the judge, or is it automatic?
It'd be at the discretion of the local courts. Again, it is something that has to be demonstrated based on income levels and the ability to repay, but also the offense that is at hand and the history of the driver's license. And, if there's multiple suspensions, things like that could weigh into a judge's decision in order to allow this program to happen or allow participation in this program.
What typically counts as community service?
The legislation hasn't come and hasn't been particularly specific on that. So I can't speak to the particulars of it, though I would assume that it's similar to what is seen in other parts of the justice system.
I wonder how long an offender would have to perform community service to get their license back. Again, maybe that's at the discretion of the judge.
That is also at the discretion of the judge, as far as I understand.
Now, doing community service instead of paying a fine means less revenue for Pennsylvania, obviously. So I can imagine lawmakers having a debate over this point.
Sure. So it seems as though it's hard to quantify how much revenue would be lost, again, because it's up to the discretion of the local courts as to who participates in this program and what the parameters of it would look like, what those payment plans would look like. And so it's expected to have a negative impact on the revenue, of course, but lawmakers are always kind of looking at this in a broader economic context, in the sense that if more people are able to drive and reliably get to work or the grocery store or to the gas station, that the money that they are putting into the economy will help with state revenues in other areas. However, the state has collected in excess of $10.3 million in fees and penalties from driving suspensions through 2019 through 2022. So the state's collected about 6.8 million of that. So obviously the state wouldn't lose all 6 million of that. But again, it's hard to quantify at this point in time.
Kristen, who was the lawmaker who took the lead on this legislation, and what reasons did he give for working on it?
Sure. So Senator Jay Costa, who is the Senate Democratic leader, worked on this with Senator Pat Stefano, who is a Republican. And the idea here is that, again, it's to empower drivers to escape the prison of debt. And these are created by fees and fines from traffic violations. I think we're all aware, if you've ever gotten a speeding ticket or anything like that, that those fees can be very high, sometimes prohibitively high for other people who have to pay utility bills and groceries, as we discussed earlier. The idea here, again, is to help those people restore their licenses and get back to their normal lives and not continue to face penalties that would further hurt their economic position in life. Jay Costa, in expressing support for the legislation and happiness that it has passed, he said, by allowing judges to assign community service instead of financial penalties for drivers already struggling to make ends meet, we can ensure workers get to jobs, patients get to doctor's appointments, kids get to school, and families can live their lives. So that really kind of encapsulates the entire intent of this legislation.
Kristen, you wrote in your story that the Senate spent 4 years working on this bill. Why did it take so long?
There's a lot of legislative priorities that happen in the legislature, and so there are sometimes things that fall by the wayside. And there's always tweaks to be made and deals to be made. But as we're coming to the end of the legislative session here, you're seeing a lot of smaller bills that are bipartisan finally getting through the process. It's not that they're not important; it's just that bigger issues take priority.
Last question, Kristen. Earlier in the interview, you indicated that the governor will sign or has signed this legislation. So anyway, he's on board with it, right?
Clearly, he's not had a ton of vetoes in his tenure, and it's a bipartisan bill. He's very much, his economic policy is about supporting middle class and low income workers to get back to their lives. So this is quite in line with his messaging and his policy decisions.
Kristen Smith, regional editor of the Center Square. Thank you.
Thank you.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after a short break. Welcome back. Our guests are Matthew Yarnell from SEIU Healthcare PA and Alex Halper from the State Chamber of Business and Industry. Alex, what do you want the candidates to keep in mind for working people in Pennsylvania?
You know, we often hear and think about politics as all being local, but increasingly we are in a global economy. We saw in the last couple weeks in Russia, Vladimir Putin hosting a conference with a number of countries, and the main theme being that they believe the time of the United States as the global leader is coming to an end. And I think what we hope candidates are thinking about on a long-term global perspective is how do we maintain America's position as the leader of the global economy that has produced the most economic growth. It has produced these incredible outcomes, not just for the United States, but for the world. So how do candidates at all levels of government think about their roles as growing the economy, which of course not only benefits the economy, but benefits people, whether they're small business owners, whether they're employees in various stages of their careers, providing job opportunities for younger Pennsylvanians in this case. We need an economy that's thriving, and public policy is a big part of that.
How about you, Matt? What's on your mind as far as what the candidates ought to be thinking?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. There's a lot on my mind as we're 7 days out from this election that will really determine the future of our country, I believe. Many of us, myself included, have been out volunteering, knocking doors, talking to other labor unions and members about this election. And front and center is what are we going to do for an economy that works for working people? And we're excited and have endorsed Kamala Harris for president because we believe, and the reason I've been volunteering is Kamala's been fighting for working people every step of the way in her public life. Kamala has taken on, I think the big big banks and protecting people in their homes when she was in California. She has also stood with striking workers, which matters a lot in this economy. If we're going to get to an economy that works for working people, we need elected officials that are going to do everything they can to make it easier for workers to join unions, to be able to get to collective bargaining, to be able to lift themselves up. In this economy, when it's been tilted so far to the rich and wealthy, we need to have strong unions in this economy to make sure that folks have the basics that they need to be able to have a living wage, to be able to have access to full and affordable and accessible health care, to be able to get to a secure retirement, to be able to get to the kind of education folks need to be able to advance their lives. So I think that's really front and center and needs to be front and center for any candidate, and it's why we've endorsed Kamala Harris for president.
Now, Alex, you talked about restoring the United States' position as a global power, but let's narrow it down. Let's get into some of the specific issues that are on the chamber's mind right now with this election days away.
Well, certainly, and not just restore, but I think maintain. We are the global power, and that has created the greatest benefits we could imagine. Again, not just for the United States, not just for working Americans, but across the globe. But the point is that we can't simply rest on our laurels. We understand that there are outside forces who do not share our vision for a global economy. So how do we do that? And it does come down to some specific policies. We saw a number of years ago the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed at the federal level, which created a more competitive climate for American businesses to be able, again, to compete with their counterparts around the globe. That had enormous benefits for economic growth, for job creation, and for wage growth. Many of those tax provisions that were included in that legislation are due to expire next year in 2025. And if there is not action taken at the congressional federal level to extend those tax policies, American families and American businesses are going to experience one of the largest tax increases in history. That could have profound impacts on our economy, on jobs, on wage growth, et cetera. We also have tremendous needs in terms of energy and growing our energy capacity. Pennsylvania is the #1 exporter of electricity in the nation. We, working very closely with many allies in organized labor in the energy sector, have really brought Pennsylvania to that place where we're not only exporting electricity but creating really good career-oriented, high-wage jobs within the trades. So whether it's tax policy or energy policy, we are at a very pivotal moment, and we have an opportunity with a new Congress, with a new president coming in, whoever that president is, to continue us on what should be a very positive path.
Where does that exported energy go to anyway? Does it go overseas?
Mainly to our neighboring states, to New York, to Maryland. Pennsylvania is part of this multi-state PJM of networks that handle how electricity is produced in the region. We are a leader in that space, and again, the #1 exporter. But this PJM has projected out over the coming years and decades that we will be facing, and we're getting to that cliff, a serious existential threat in terms of base load capacity of being able to provide the energy to power the lights, to power these cameras, to power our homes. And that's important for Pennsylvania families in terms of energy costs. But that's critically important for employers as well, for manufacturing and other high energy users, whether it's in healthcare or other emerging industries, technology. We are approaching a huge reduction in that capacity at a time when we need more energy than ever.
Why is that reduction taking place?
It's a combination of public policy and others that have made it more difficult for the energy sector to create new power generation.
Are we still sending natural gas in a liquid form overseas?
Well, yes, but not to the extent that we ought to be. And there is a push to create a liquefied natural gas terminal in southeastern Pennsylvania. You know, of course, we think about the impact on Pennsylvanians, on employers, on individuals and jobs, and that type of exporting potential has huge benefits for Pennsylvania's economy. But we also think about the impact on our allies overseas. We still have this horrible conflict, this war between Russia and Ukraine, and that has created energy challenges for many of our allies in Eastern Europe and throughout Europe. We need to be part of that energy solution. It also has tremendous benefits on the environment. No country, major energy producing country, is doing it as cleanly and has reduced emissions as much as we are in the United States and in Pennsylvania specifically. So we're talking about producing the energy that we all need. I think we all take for granted sometimes. But also part of long-term goals in terms of emission reductions.
Matt, the business community is concerned with what they consider is excessive regulation. Is this on your mind? And if so, give me an example.
No. I mean, excessive regulation is not on my mind. I actually think that there are some regulations that need tweaked to make sure that we are doing the right thing for patients.
Like what, for instance?
So, yeah, I can talk a bit about that, kind of what's on our mind as healthcare workers. One is getting to safe staffing in the Commonwealth and frankly across the country. And so, you know, we've been, as a healthcare union, working really hard to win safe patient ratios to make sure that if you are in critical care in a hospital, that you have a nurse that can focus on you and not 3, 4, 5 other critically ill patients.
There have been bills to that effect, right?
There have been bills to that effect. And in fact, there's one candidate who on record has stood up to the hospital industry in California to enforce staffing laws and ratios to make sure that nurses are safe, but also patients are safe. So, you know, we are excited to continue to work on that issue. I think also in nursing homes, we continue in the state here, we made progress under the Wolf administration and has continued forward under the Shapiro administration around having ratios for caregivers to residents. And that's been a huge step in the right direction. Again, we have a candidate who's running for president who has worked in D.C. To move new rules and regulations around nursing home staffing. So regardless of your zip code, you would know that you're getting quality care, and you have a number of caregivers to number of residents that is safe, no matter where you live. So that is an important issue. And then I just on home care, I think just to spend a minute on that. We have an opportunity in this election to make a choice of a candidate who understands care is actually a really important piece of our economy versus a candidate who does not. And Kamala Harris has walked a day in the shoes of a home care worker. Kamala Harris understands what caregiving is. She took care of her own mother as she was aging and dying. You know, we have an opportunity here to do something big. She has an initiative to expand PASS hours, so personal assistant services, to Medicare. Right now, the only way to get home care services is Medicaid, and your only option is to essentially go to a nursing home. And she's saying that Medicare recipients should be eligible to be able to get basic home care resources in your home. That would personally impact my mother. It would take away this issue if you have any property or any kind of wealth, you can't access basic needs when you're aging, and that would change this. And it would be transformative all across the Commonwealth and across this country.
You know, Matt hit on an important topic, and that's workforce in general. We don't have, whether it's in Pennsylvania or the nation, we don't have the people to fill the open positions in the workforce. That plays out in the healthcare setting. We talk to hospitals throughout Pennsylvania, and you know they are desperate to hire nurses. They've raised their wages.
And you want to keep them too, give them some
of course,
incentive,
absolutely.
Right?
They you know, our hospitals are being more creative in their benefit packages, paying for education, paying for continuing education, raising their wages, creating more flexible work days. But they just can't find the people. We appreciate, I suppose, the intent behind ratios, but for a lot of these hospitals, especially in rural Pennsylvania, saying, look, we would love to have that ratio find us the people. We need the people. We the legislation that would really have some pretty draconian penalties or even force shutdowns of hospitals if they don't hit these ratios. I mean, I'm not sure how that's helping communities. We all want our friends and family and even ourselves, if we're in those positions, to have the care that they need. But what our hospitals and really employers in many industries are saying is that we don't have the people to fill these open positions. So whether it's in healthcare, in manufacturing, and other industries, we need policies that are really oriented towards workforce, getting people who are currently on the sidelines back into employment, creating better pipelines so that our educational institutions are preparing young Pennsylvanians, young Americans for careers in the future. Because if we don't have the people, we're not going to be able to power the economy.
Can we go outside of Pennsylvania to find these people, Matt?
Well, a couple things that come to mind from Alex's comments. One is we have a choice in this presidential election about which kind of candidate we're going to elect. We're either going to elect a candidate who I believe, Kamala Harris, will bring people together at the table to resolve the issues. And when I say people, I mean working people. Like part of what we have to do is make sure that we are engaging workers directly and solving the problems. And I believe Kamala Harris will stand up to make it easier for workers to join unions, to make it easier for folks to access collective bargaining, which really matters about getting it right in workplaces. So I just want to say that. And that's true whether we're talking about taxes and who's going to benefit from those tax cuts. Are we going to give them to billionaires and millionaires, or are we going to make sure that working families get the tax cuts that they need in this environment? Whether that's the energy policy and whether that's the trades are actually at the table and helping to decide how we're going to make sure that we're growing unions and doing things the right way versus really giving all the power and control to corporations. And that's certainly true in healthcare. I think you're seeing right now healthcare workers on the move in southwestern Pennsylvania. Nurses have been organizing like crazy and lifting standards like crazy. I don't disagree with Alex that we have a workforce challenge. We also have a challenge of not good jobs. And if our tax dollars are going to these institutions, we should be fighting to make sure these are good living wage jobs that have the kind of conditions that allow people to do their job and do their job well. So I think that, to me, that is the kind of choice that's on the ballot. I would say one other thing. When Donald Trump was in office, he appointed anti-union, he stacked the deck of anti-union folks at the labor board. He stacked the courts with anti-union folks. And he recently, praised and said to Elon Musk that we should fire striking workers, fire them. And so I think that is the opposite direction of what we need in an economy that works for working people. We need to elect a leader that understands that organizing unions matters a lot to winning an economy that works for working people.
You asked about bringing people from outside of Pennsylvania, and it's going to require really an all-of-the-above, multi-pronged strategy to address what is really a workforce crisis and a growing crisis. The Pennsylvania Independent Fiscal Office put out a report recently showing our demographic projections in Pennsylvania. And the fastest growing cohort over the next 10 years is going to be Pennsylvanians who are over 80 years old, while the younger working age Pennsylvania population is really stagnating. So if we think our current challenges are slowing down our economy, it is hard to see a light at the end of the tunnel. So whether it's something I think probably both candidates talk about, something I know when Donald Trump was in the White House focused on was criminal justice reform and trying to advance policies that help facilitate employment for individuals with criminal records, for individuals coming out of incarceration. That's something that we at the PA Chamber have been involved in at the state level, and it has benefited of course, the individuals and their families and communities, but also Pennsylvania employers. We hear a lot about immigration policy, and unfortunately, that discussion really often gets dominated by some of the very divisive components of immigration policy. But we really focus on it, from a workforce perspective. Do we have policies in place, whether it's with work visas or green cards? Do we have systems that allow for an expeditious process? If you want to be in the United States and work here, do we make it a smooth process to bring you here? If you're from another country and you come to one of Pennsylvania's great institutions of higher education and get educated here, do we have the policies in place that will encourage you to stay here in Pennsylvania and work at one of our local employers and continue to grow that segment of the workforce? So, addressing it is going to be all the above, but the truth is right now, we don't have the people in Pennsylvania to fill the positions. We've had one of the smallest kindergarten classes this past year that we've had in decades. So there's going to have to be a game change in the coming years and decades to right this ship. If we're going to have an economy that provides good wages and career-oriented jobs.
So that interests me that the chamber should be watching the size of a kindergarten class. That took me by surprise.
Absolutely. The PA Chamber has been around for 108 years, and we hope to be around for another 100 years. So we're looking for economic growth not only today and tomorrow, but in the years and decades to come. And when we see population stagnation,
people are having fewer kids, I suppose.
Yeah, and it is impacting us. We are hearing so much about Pennsylvania, and we see all the ads. I mean, Pennsylvania in the presidential race, because of our 19 electoral votes, is one of the most sought after, if not the most sought after state in the presidential election. If you go back 90 years or so, 80 or 90 years, we had 36, 38 electoral college votes. We are seeing.
And every 10 years, you got to take a census, and it changes.
Exactly. So our population, compared to the rest of the country, is stagnating, and we are not keeping pace. And again, that has some very practical impacts in terms of presidential elections, but also with federal funding. And from our perspective, how we create a workforce that will serve the needs of Pennsylvanians and our business community.
Just two more things on this topic, if I may. We have hospital employers who can't get folks in from other countries because of the way in which our immigration laws work. And so I just would say we have to solve the challenges around immigration. We have to do it in a humane way. I think that the rhetoric in this election is dangerous. And it can be deadly to communities, the way and how divisive this issue has been. And healthcare workers, we need. I think it is an all of the above strategy to fill the workforce needs. I don't disagree with that at all. But I do think we need actual solutions. And the current rules have whole groups of healthcare workers who would come here to do the work that can't get in because we're already past the caps. So there needs to be a solution, around immigration. I also just want to go back to good jobs. We need to get to good jobs. On home care, again, we have a care crisis in this Commonwealth. For everyone out there who needs care, there's one caregiver right now to 6 people who need care. The average wage for a caregiver that is a home care worker is $13.30. That's the average. A lot of people are at $11, $12 an hour. There is nobody who can live on that money in this economy. It's just not possible. And so the turnover is through the roof. And if we're ever going to get to a place where folks can get good care in their homes, we're going to have to invest. And so, again, I go back to, I think we have a clear choice in this election. I think we have a presidential candidate that understands care, that understands that we need to be able to organize, that understands that we need good jobs. And that goes a long way in getting people to do this work. People are not going to sign up for a job that's $11 or $12 an hour. They're just not in this economy. We need to make sure that caregiving is respected and paid.
And caregiving seems to have reached a new level in recent years versus going to an institution.
Yeah.
So people should be listening.
Yes.
Let's take a break, fellas, because I'm going to give you a break just for a minute while we look at program notes for PCN. The election is only a few days away now. On the issues has Jim Lee, President and CEO of Susquehanna Polling and Research. He'll tell us about their new survey that asks voters about the candidates and the issues that are important to them. Jim Lee will be here Wednesday at 7 p.m. Right after that, we'll consider the election from a healthcare perspective with Leslie Dock from Protect Our Care. And he'll be here on Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Then we'll introduce you to another candidate on your ballot for November 5th. That'll be Chris DeLuzio, a Democrat running for Congress in Pennsylvania's District 17. He'll tell us about his campaign on Wednesday at 8 p.m. On Journalist Roundtable this week, Steve Ulrich of Politics PA, Ryan Dito from Trib Live and the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, and Tom Reese from WESA join us for the latest news from the state capitol. They'll be here on Thursday at 7 p.m. PIAA championship time on PCN. We have boys and girls individual golf for you. The competitors include the top 10 from the 2A and 3A divisions. That's on Friday at 7 p.m. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free of charge on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers and donors like you to help achieve its mission. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Okay, we're back to talking about the election and the candidates and the impact on business. And now's a good time to get a quick refresher on your respective organizations. Alex, tell us briefly about the Chamber.
The PA Chamber is the largest broad-based employer advocacy association in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We were founded in 1916. Today we have about 10,000 business members, again, all over Pennsylvania, all 67 counties, from the largest corporations we all know of to the small mom and pop shops in main streets in Pennsylvania, and covering all industries. Pennsylvania is very fortunate to have a very diverse economy in manufacturing, energy, but also life sciences and technology and other emerging fields. And we have we represent all of those industries and advocate for Pennsylvania to have the most competitive business climate in the country.
And Matt, tell us about SEIU Healthcare.
Sure. Yeah, so we're the state's largest healthcare workers union. We bring together and represent about 10,000 registered nurses that work in acute care hospitals across the Commonwealth, including Commonwealth health professionals, registered nurses that work directly for the Commonwealth, about 5,000 nursing home workers that work in skilled nursing facilities, mostly Medicaid homes in the for-profit side of the sector, but we also represent some nonprofit sector as well. And then a little over 5,000 home care workers, largely folks who work directly for their consumers, so participant-directed home care workers, but also some agency home care workers that work for Centers for Independent Living. So, we get up every day, working hard to bargain contracts and represent workers, but also do a lot of work in public policy space around, pushing for the kind of policies that both lift up and protect patients and also workers.
Let's talk about what the presidential candidates are talking about as far as any plans for taxes that would affect small business. For example, Kamala Harris wants to increase the tax deduction for small businesses from $5,000 to $50,000. Alex, I'll put it to you. How much can that help?
Look, we appreciate both candidates seem to be focused on tax policy to help various segments of the business community. We appreciate that proposal from Vice President Harris. We, of course, none of these are considered in a vacuum. So while Vice President Harris has put forth some policies that would certainly benefit certain small businesses, we've also seen what is at times pretty hostile, confrontational posture from the vice president with other segments of the business community. I think as an organization that represents both small businesses as well as larger businesses, we understand this is all an ecosystem that works together. And when you have strong larger businesses, that benefits small businesses, whether they're vendors, whether they're serving a restaurant down the street. And we saw it tragically in some cases during the pandemic, when a large corporation was not, prior to bringing their people back into the office, we saw so much of that sort of support infrastructure that exists around a large business, the local coffee shop, the diner, they all struggled and unfortunately sometimes had to close down. So we understand that it all kind of works together.
And some offices are still empty after the pandemic.
and it's true, and some of those small businesses, whether it's restaurants or little shops, never reopen. They close down. So we understand that all these policies kind of work together, and we would certainly prefer to see candidates who focus on supporting economic growth in general. But to the extent you have either candidate or candidates for other offices who are focused on helping small businesses and supporting economic growth, we think that's a good thing.
Now, Harris wants to increase that tax deduction again from $5,000 to $50,000. I wonder how that $50,000 figure was arrived at. Any insight?
Just seems like a nice round number that
That's what I thought you might say.
that voters can remember. I don't know how that number was
It
arrived
has some public
at.
relations value to it.
Well, and I don't want to underestimate the Harris campaign, that there isn't some smart economics behind.
At the same
that
time, you want to come
number.
up with something that's going to resonate with the voters, and they'll remember it. I suppose, right?
I'm sure that plays into it to some degree. But look, if the idea, we know for a lot of these small businesses, especially for newer employers, many times, it is very difficult to start a new business, let alone sustain one. You are frequently, if not typically, losing money in the first few years. I don't think a lot of people appreciate the risk and the challenge that goes into starting a business. We've talked a lot at the state level about promoting policies that allow these new startups to keep more of their profits or to keep more of their revenue before they're even turning a profit. Because in most cases, they are simply reinvesting that revenue back into their business. They're trying to hire people. They're trying to create competitive wages in an environment when wages are as competitive as they've ever been, and it is so challenging, as we've been talking about, to recruit people. These small businesses are trying to buy capital and maybe buy more office space. So
or just get a loan to get started.
Yeah,
how about that?
Yeah, exactly.
Are those kind of startups more frequent, or are they diminishing?
It's kind of, it changes, it seems like, by the year. I think we've seen steady progress in startups nationally. Unfortunately, Pennsylvania in many cases has not seen the type of growth in startups that the rest of the country has. Last year, the Kauffman Institute put out a report showing that Pennsylvania was actually tied with West Virginia. And apologies to any West Virginians watching the show, but tied with West Virginia as the last state in the country in terms of entrepreneurship, policies that support entrepreneurs and startups. So, nationally, a better story, unfortunately, than we have in Pennsylvania. But I think there's reasons for optimism here in the Commonwealth.
Earlier in our show, we discussed the Affordable Care Act. There are certain subsidies for the Affordable Care Act that are set to expire at the end of 2025. And Matt, are you watching that? And what does that mean to SEIU and healthcare workers and the consequences if these subsidies do indeed expire at the end of 25?
Yeah, I think we have to continue to, it's a really important question, and we also know former President Trump's record on the Affordable Care Act. He tried to dismantle, overturn, kill the Affordable Care Act over and over again and was defeated over and over again. And so, and we know from his own debate that he's got ideas but not plans, and will continue on that track. And so I think the Affordable Care Act has been transformative for folks who need care in this country, and needs to continue to be tuned up, and I think we need to continue to expand access. So we should continue the credits, and we should stay the course and make sure that we are making healthcare more accessible and more affordable for folks all across this country, and certainly here in the Commonwealth. And I think that again, when you're looking at your choice for presidential candidate, you've got a candidate who understands that care is important and an important piece of our economy and is going to want to invest, bring people to the table, and improve. And we have a candidate who, despises what he would then call Obamacare and wants to overturn it, repeal it, get rid of it, but does not have a replacement plan. And so I just think that is a clear example of the difference between these two candidates in this election.
And Kamala Harris does indeed want to extend these subsidies for the Affordable Care Act set to expire at the end of 2025. However, it's got to go through Congress. It's not as simple as a candidate going up there and promising and delivering it. They need some cooperation. I wonder what the atmosphere in Washington is for coming up with this. Alex, I'm going to give it to you because you're smirking.
Well, you think about the atmosphere in Washington, and of course we hope it's not as bad as it seems like it is from the outside. And of course, as Matt said, we're 7 days away from an election. We're in a time when the ads we see on TV, a lot of the public dialogue seems to really emphasize all of the differences. And of course, we hope when lawmakers arrive at their respective capitals, whether it's Washington, D.C. or Harrisburg or any other state, that they'll find areas of common ground. I think most lawmakers with respect to health care can agree that the Affordable Care Act is not the end-all, be-all. Now, maybe there's disagreements whether we need small tweaks or more significant reform, but I think for a lot of employers who are providing health insurance or individuals seeing their costs go up, clearly there is room for improvement. And of course, we'll learn in a few days what type of Congress the new president will have to interact with. Will it continue to be a divided government, or will one party have control over another? But whatever it is, healthcare is, I think Matt would agree, probably one of the most challenging areas of public policy and to really tackle. And we'll find out soon who's going to be doing the tackling.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think, again, we have a choice in this election, and more than one, obviously. The presidential ticket is at the top. And I believe that Kamala will be on the side of working families and standing up for care. I also know that Senator Bob Casey has been a champion in protecting the Affordable Care Act under the Trump administration, working to expand and improve it under the Biden administration, and has been a real champion for care, period. So I think those are two leaders that will work closely together to make sure that we are working together to solve the problems around healthcare and to improve, not just sort of tear down without a plan to replace.
And while we're talking about health care, we should not neglect talking about the cost of prescription drugs. The Inflation Reduction Act limits out-of-pocket costs for prescription drugs on Medicare. Harris wants this for everybody. And so immediately I think, what could the effect be on the business community?
Well, I think the question becomes, and there are a lot of very ambitious, I think, well-intended proposals, and this is not limited to one party or another, or limited to Washington, D.C., but a lot of well-intended proposals that would cost massive amounts of money in the years ahead, at a time where, of course, we run annual deficits, our debt is in the trillions and growing. So again, it's difficult to consider any of these policies in a vacuum. If we're going to promote ideas that have a very significant fiscal impact and cost today and in future generations, we're going to need the taxpayers to pay the taxes to fund those ideas in the long term. And that means, at the end of the day, we need more businesses. We need more business growth. We need more employees contributing through taxes to fund these programs. So again, it's challenging sometimes to think about candidates. And we have heard it from the vice president, who have ambitious ideas that will require significant funding, but then also talk about companies and employers with hostility. And we talk about inflation and this notion that employers are solely responsible for inflation when they're dealing with the same inflation that the rest of us have dealt with. We've seen over the last number of years $5 trillion in stimulus money added to the national economy. Maybe that's what was necessary at the time, but I don't think there's any doubt that contributed and was a major driver to inflation. So again, we appreciate these ambitious ideas, but at the same time, they have to be balanced with plans to grow our economy.
And I would just say we have to have tax fairness. I mean, I think, when you think about the one thing, if Donald Trump is reelected, the one thing he will absolutely do is extend his tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires. And there's no way on earth that a nurse or a certified nursing assistant or a dietary worker should be paying more in taxes than a millionaire or billionaire. Mm-hmm. And so I don't disagree with Alex, like how do you pay for these things? But I also think we could have a fairer tax code. And if we're gonna pay our taxes, we gotta know what we're paying for. And if it means we're gonna get good health insurance, if it means we're gonna have a fair retirement, if it means we're gonna have income security in this country, then let's have that conversation. And I think we can do that in the richest country in the world. We can figure out how people are not living in poverty and how we're continuing to subsidize low-wage jobs with our tax dollars. Like there are answers to these challenges, and I think there's a clear choice in the candidate in this presidential election.
We have about 2 minutes left in our program. What bills are in Harrisburg right now that are of interest to you, Alex?
Well, we were pleased to see in the last year the state legislature working with the Shapiro administration to advance some pro-growth initiatives, improving our tax code, improving our regulatory environment, particularly with respect to permitting. So we're focused again on creating what we believe can be the most competitive state in the country to do business. We have the geographic benefits, but it requires improvements to the tax code, and we want to see continued improvements to our state permitting systems, as well as expanding on successful, effective workforce programs.
How about you, Matt? About 30 seconds.
Yeah, there's an entire list of bills that are sitting at the Senate that the House has passed that are pro-worker, pro-labor, pro-people in this Commonwealth that can't get done because the Senate won't have hearings on them. Safe staffing for one, minimum wage bill. For a second example, there are many more.
Our guests have been Matthew Yarnell from SEIU Healthcare PA and Alex Halper from the State Chamber of Business and Industry. Thanks for joining us. PCN's Ellen Franz talked to Senator Ryan Aument about limiting the use of cell phones in schools.
Senator Ryan Aument, welcome to our program. Your bill involving cell phone usage in schools passed both the House and the Senate. Can you tell us about this bill?
Yes, I initially started with a piece of legislation that would have created a pilot program for school districts to apply and receive funding so that they could purchase lockable bags and secure smartphones from students during the school day. What ultimately passed, was enacted as part of our state budget in the school code, was a program that allows for all school districts, not a pilot, not a limited pilot, but all school districts from across the Commonwealth, a program where they can apply for funding under our school safety and mental health grants. So that's a program that's funded at $100 million in this year's budget. They can apply for that funding so they could purchase bags to secure smartphones during the school day. I think it's become critically important in order to increase the academic performance of our young people, to improve the mental health and the physical health of our students, that we free them for 6.5 hours during the school day from smartphones.
Was there a specific incident that occurred or a story you heard that inspired you to create this bill?
So over the last 2 years, I have increasingly heard from educators, and as I visit classrooms and tour schools, have had classroom teachers come up to me and say, increasingly, the number one classroom management issue that I confront today is smartphones in schools. The number one negative cause, the driver of conflict in school, is smartphones and social media. And as a parent, I've witnessed this. I have a teenage son. I have a daughter who's approaching the age of 12. And so like many other parents, I'm working to navigate this issue of when to introduce technology, when it's appropriate to introduce smartphones, what the appropriate use of those smartphones are, and when appropriately to introduce social media. But what's become very clear to me, and there's a whole body of research now, Dr. Haidt has written a phenomenal book called The Anxious Generation, where he's released a significant amount of research that he's done that points to not just a correlation, but a causation of the mental health crisis in young people today to the rise of smartphones and social media access.
So you mentioned there is a rise in the mental health problems because of the phone, and in the memorandum that you submitted for this bill, you cited a study that stated depression rates in teenagers increased around 150% since the early 2010s. What exactly is it about the cell phones that is causing this mental health crisis?
Yeah, it's quite remarkable because our children today, our adolescents today, are more interconnected than they've ever been, but they're also more lonely than they've ever been. And so specifically, it's social media, and where there are algorithms, where the big tech companies and social media companies have built into their platforms that are encouraging young people to develop their sense of self and identity and feelings of self-worth through clicks, through the number of folks who like a post, who share a post, who comment on a post. And so this has had a negative impact on mental health. We've seen anxiety go up. We've seen levels of depression go up, self-harm, attempted self-harm, suicide, attempted suicide, all around the same period of time between about 2010 and 2014, as we've had the rise of smartphone access among adolescents and the development of social media, and particularly the link between the front-facing camera on a device and the link to social media.
So talk us through how these bags work. What do they look like? I know you said they're lockable.
Yeah. The advantage of the bags, and many districts are, and I'm supportive of this, are approaching this issue their own way. At this point, I've been very supportive of giving districts the flexibility whether or not to go smartphone free, although I'm certainly encouraging them to adopt a smartphone free policy, and how they do that. And districts are doing different things. Some, in fact, I just talked to a school district recently that their rule is that students may keep the phone, but it has to be turned off in a book bag or in a locker. If they violate that rule, if they're accessing the phone, then the phone has to be turned into the school office. But what I've heard from many school district administrators, from many classroom teachers, and from many parents is there's a real hesitancy to take the phone because it's a very valuable piece of property. And so if the teacher doesn't want to be liable or a school doesn't want to be liable for a lost phone, for a damaged phone, for a stolen phone. And so what the bag does, it allows for the student to keep the phone on them. They just can't access it. So the bag that many folks may be most familiar with is called a Yonder bag, but there are other companies who do this. It's like a laptop bag, but it's a canvas bag that's built specifically for personal devices such as a smartphone, such as an iPhone. You drop the phone in, you lock the device, and the student cannot unlock it. It would have to be unlocked by an unlocking device at the end of the school day. So again, the benefit is the student keeps the phone. They're not turning over the property, but they can't access it, and we're freeing our kids, breaking the cycle of addiction for 6.5 hours during the school day, which I think is critically important.
What would the pouch rollout look like? Would schools have to sign up to receive the pouches in advance?
So there's an application process with the school safety and mental health grants. This is a program that we've had in place the last number of years. This budget, the governor called for increased funding. The legislature, in a bipartisan way, supported increased funding. So that funding has increased from $50 million to $100 million for school safety and mental health grants. And again, I think a real critical issue for schools to solve for if they want to protect students, if they want to create safe school environments and improve student mental health, is to free kids from smartphones. So they would apply for the funding, and in that application would outline that they're seeking to purchase these smartphone bags and adopt a policy to go smartphone free, bell to bell during the school day, and then they can receive funding to then purchase smartphone lockable bags. Again, there's no mandate, there's no requirement. It's a school district by district choice and how they implement the policy. But I'm certainly doing all I can to encourage districts to take advantage of the funding and take advantage of the opportunity to enact policies to free our kids from these devices.
You mentioned earlier about teachers being very concerned with their students not focusing in class. What have they said about your initiative with these lockable bags?
There's been a lot of enthusiasm. I have to tell you, when I first started talking about this about a year ago, after I met Dr. Haidt, who wrote the book The Next Generation that I mentioned earlier, and I was already working through this issue as a parent and thinking about my experience as a parent and talking to my staff about public policy approaches. when I first started talking about this, I wasn't exactly sure how families, how educators would respond. I have to tell you, there's been enthusiastic support from educators. As I mentioned earlier, I noticed a trend in the last couple of years where this was the #1 issue that teachers were bringing to me, saying this is a major issue in terms of the school culture, safe school environment, and the academic performance of our students. And so there's been a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of support. I think districts are working with their school boards and with the communities the school boards represent to identify a policy that makes the most sense for them.
Have other states implemented something similar to this?
There's real momentum all around the country for policies such like this. And the beauty of it is, it's been incredibly bipartisan. The support for opposition to does not break along party lines. There have been very prominent Republican governors who have taken steps, whether through legislation or through executive order. Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia, Sarah Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas, and Democratic governors like Kathy Hochul and Gavin Newsom who have talked about this issue. So there's a movement around this issue, recognizing the pendulum in terms of the technology and the impact it's having, the rewiring of the adolescent brain and the impact it's having on mental health. There's a real movement for the pendulum to move the pendulum back. Yes, we need to teach digital literacy. It's critically important, but we also need to free our kids from these devices during the school day and recognize the impact these devices have had. So there's a real movement growing, grassroots movement. In fact, I've been meeting with parent groups here in Pennsylvania who are advocating for these policies in Pennsylvania.
Some parents may have concerns that in an emergency they would be unable to contact their child. Do you have a plan in place if a situation like this occurs? This is the #1 concern that is brought to my attention. And as a parent, I have to tell you, I'm very sensitive to this. The reality is, you talk to school safety experts, that what they will tell you in an emergency, in most circumstances, outcomes improve and improve dramatically when you have students who are focused on following the instructions of a responsible adult, not texting, not taking video, not making noise, not communicating and taking instruction from someone outside the building who doesn't have a situational awareness, parents who are following instructions from the school district and not interfering with the response of emergency personnel, law enforcement, first responders. But yes, what is also a significant advantage of the bag is that in that situation, again, very rare where a student does have to immediately access a phone, the bags can be rapidly unlocked or they can even be cut so a student can access the phone. But it is important, as districts enact policies, smartphone-free policies, that they are also enacting robust policies to ensure for rapid response, rapid contacting of first responders, and critically, rapid communication to parents, so parents know what is going on. But I would contend again that smartphone-free schools are safer schools. Senator Ryan Ahmet, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thanks to Ellen France for that interview. Before we go, a reminder about On the Issues this week. Jim Lee will be here Wednesday at 7 p.m. with his survey. We'll consider the election from a healthcare perspective with Leslie Dock from Protect Our Care on Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Right after that, we'll bring you Chris DeLuzio, Democrat running for Congress in Pennsylvania's District 17. He's on Wednesday at 8 p.m. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.